All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to OneClass. My name is Kevin. I'll be teaching some economics today. A little bit of a background about me. I hold both a bachelor's and master's degree in economics. I also work as an economist. What I'm going to do today is go over, I think I've got 9 questions. Going to go over the questions, our junior tutor's answers, add anything that I think is important or helpful. And yeah, we can get going here. Looks like it's working. First question. Mr. Fogg is planning an around-the-world trip. The utility from the trip is a function of how much he spends on it. Y, given by utility of Y, is equal to log of Y. There is a 25% probability that Mr. Fogg will lose $1,000 of his cash on the trip. What is the trip's expected utility? Call this A. And what we do here is break down his utility function into the 2 scenarios. So in scenario 1, 25% chance that he's going to lose. It doesn't give us an income. There's 25% chance that you'll have to do the trip with income minus 1,000 and a 75% chance that he won't lose any money and will just be able to do the trip as he normally would. And our junior tutor said, A, if there's a 25% probability that Ms. Fogg will lose $1,000 for cash on the trip, the trip's expected utility. 2 things. 1, our junior tutor wrote it as the expected utility of Y. That's correct. That's an oversight on my part. The expected utility of Y. We can't write it as the utility of Y because we're not sure which of the 2 cases are going to take place. Second thing, it looks like, unless I missed it. Yeah, it looks like our junior tutor got some of the question I didn't get because they seem to know that the income is $10,000, where that's not listed anywhere in the question. So I guess what I'll do is follow our junior tutor's answers from here, just because I'm obviously missing information. But I know the general process, so I can verify if it's correct or not. So, given that it is, excuse me while I rewrite that. So, we know that the income is going to be $10,000. So, the expected utility of Y is going to be the 25% chance that he takes a vacation while losing the money. So 10,000 minus 1,000 is $9,000. Plus a 75% chance that he doesn't lose any money and he gets his full income for the trip, which is $10,000. Cool. This appears comes out to 9.184. I trust our junior tutor. I'm not going to verify that. but he's correctly set up the question at the very least. I'm not sure if I'm going to do all 4 parts. We'll see how it goes with time. But part B. Suppose that Mr. Fogg can buy insurance against losing the $1,000, say by purchasing traveler's checks at an actuarially fair premium of $250. Actuarially fair premium basically means that it's correctly assessed. Maybe I'll actually give you guys the exact definition instead of what I'm going off memory. Equal to expected claims. So an actuarially fair premium is the one that is equal to expected claims. And in a perfect world, if they had perfect information, they would know how likely it is that whatever event you're insured against is going to happen to you specifically, and they would charge the actuarially fair price. So suppose that Mr. Fogg can buy insurance against losing the $1,000 at an actuarially fair premium of $250. So his utility is higher if he purchases the insurance than if he faces the chance of losing the $1,000 without insurance. So essentially, instead of having these 2 cases, there's the 25% chance that he has $9,000 for the trip and the 75% chance he has $10,000 for the trip. He's just going to pay $250, and then even regardless of whether or not he loses the money, he'll have the same amount of money for the trip. So in this case, we're not writing expected utility of Y, because we know what the utility is going to be. He is going to have $9,750 for his trip. And the log of $9,750 is going to be 9.185, it looks like, which is, of course, ever so marginally higher than our utility without insurance. Circle that. Question C, what is the maximum amount that Mr. Fogg will be willing to pay to insure his $1,000? So our junior tutor has said solve ln x equals 9.184, or e to the power of 9.184 equals 9,740. So a maximum of 259.96 or $260. So ln x equals 9.184. And e to the 9.184 is approximately 9,740. If the income is 10,000, so income minus that 9,740 is going to give us $260. So given that the maximum they're willing to pay is $260 for insurance, the fact that they paid $250 means that they're going to be better off, right? So in part B here, they purchased it at an actuarially fair premium of $250, but given that they only paid $260, or sorry, given that they would have paid up to $260, they got a better deal, and therefore they're better off. Move on to question 2 here. After September 11th, 2001, there was much talk that the United States was going to go into a depression. There was, in fact, a downturn in the economy that was considered by many to be a recession, but a depression did not occur. Why is another depression like the Great Depression of the 1930s not likely to occur? What laws or groups in our economy are responsible for keeping us out of a depression? And our junior tutor said that the September 11th, 2001 attacks were an initial shock, causing global stock markets to drop sharply. In international and domestic markets, stocks of companies in some sectors were hit particularly hard. Travel and entertainment stocks fell, while communications, pharmaceutical, and defense stocks rose. Online, travel agencies particularly suffered as they cater to leisure travel, even though the depression did not occur, but it went into recession. I think it is important to note that a decrease in the stock market does not constitute a recession. They often go hand in hand, but if the stock market drops, that's not a recession. In fact, there are recessions where the stock market rises throughout, or there have been, I should say. Recession occurs when there is retracting GDP, I believe for 2 consecutive quarters, off the top of my head. The economy had contracted 1.3% in the first quarter, but it bounced up 2.7% in the second quarter. The attacks made the economy contract 1.1% in the third quarter, extending the recession. Although the recession was officially over by November of 2001, threats of war drove the Dow down for another year. The Dow is a stock market index in the United States until October 9th, 2002, when it closed at 7,286.27, a 37.8% decline from its peak. A depression of the 1930s kind is unlikely because of more prompt policy actions, both monetary and fiscal. As an after effect of those times, Keynes advocated the use of fiscal policy to help bring the economy out of deficient demand situation. Thus, in the initial stages of the Depression, such measures were not available. Moreover, the response of the Fed to tackle the depression through monetary policy response was not sufficient in terms of fall in demand and prices of the goods. But now the responses to deal with inflationary or deflationary situations are much more prompt, hence a depression of that magnitude is unlikely. What laws or groups in our economy are responsible for keeping us out of a depression? There are certain safeguards such as the FDIC, which measures that the money you have placed in a bank is secure. However, monies put into the stock market, etc., do not have the same surety and value. Even though we're in a depression-type state with the value of everyday goods increasing and non-essential goods going unsold, there are more safety measures than when the Great Depression hit. I believe the Great Depression, they essentially with the Great Depression, I believe they essentially left it up to the free markets, aka let the invisible hand, supply and demand, solve it. And it was not very effective and lasted a long time. On the other hand, with the financial crisis, there was a lot of government intervention. They talked about, as our junior tutor talked about with the monetary policy in the paragraph there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to add. I thought our junior tutor did a good job, but yeah, I think all banks are required to have reserves of 10%, I believe, which I think corresponds to the FDIC, but that's, again, off the top of my head. I don't remember entirely, but it was a very good write-up by our junior tutor. All right, question 3. Spring is here, and Cho and her uncle would like to go fishing for the weekend in Washington. Cho could either go to the river in town, where anyone can fish without a permit, or she could drive up to a stream located on her family's property in the countryside to fish. Assume that no matter where people fish, all of the fish that are caught would be kept. That is, there is no catch and release policy. The fish in the private stream are considered ... and ... where the fish in the river are ... and ... In other words, the fish in the private stream are an example of blank, and the fish in the river are an example of blank. Fishing in the river will likely lead to blank because of which of the following reasons. 1, nobody will enjoy fishing. I guess we'll get there once we answer the earlier stuff. So what I believe they're getting at here is public and private goods. So private goods. Are those that are excludable. And rival. Public goods. Are those that are non-excludable. And I'll explain what these mean in a second if you don't know. Non-excludable and non-rival. And a common resource. Common resource is going to be non-excludable. But it is going to be rival. So what does excludable and rival mean? If a good is excludable, that means that others can be prevented from using it. So with a private good, if you own it, you can say to others, no, you cannot use this. Whereas if a good is public, say like a park, you cannot stop other people from enjoying a walk in the park because it's a public good, there's no ownership, or government ownership, but Something is rival. That means that my consumption will impact your ability to also consume that good. So for example, like a box of cereal, if I have a bowl of cereal, there is now less cereal left for you. And if I were to finish the cereal, there would be none left for you. So private goods are goods that are excludable and rival. These are something you may go buy at the store. If you go buy, like a box of cereal, you can say, no, that's my cereal, you can't eat it. And when you consume it, there's less left for the future. Public goods are non-excludable and non-rival. So you can't stop anybody from going for a walk in the park. And you going for a walk in the park doesn't impact anyone else's ability to walk in the park. A common resource is something like fishing in a public space. The fish, sorry, I lost my train of thought. You can't stop other people from fishing there, but the good is rival, because if you catch a fish, there's now less fish to be caught. So what they're looking for here, answers are, fish in the private stream are considered private goods. I think it's actually probably looking for excludable and rival. Fish in the private stream are considered excludable and rival. So if we remember, the private stream is located on her family's property, so they can turn other people away from fishing. And if she catches the fish in that river, there are less fish to be caught by the people. And then the fish in the river are going to be non-excludable but rival. So therefore, the fish in the river are going to be an example of a common resource. And fishing in the river will likely lead to, I think, tragedy of the commons is what they're getting at. Yes, tragedy of the commons. So the tragedy of the commons is essentially when a good is non-excludable and you can't stop people from using it, but it is rival. It's going to be inefficient because nobody has an incentive to replenish or not consume the good. But because it is rival, the amount of the good, the quantity of the good will eventually be depleted. That's the tragedy of the commons. I might, I think I will pull up that definition just for something a little more exact for you guys. So every individual has an incentive to consume a resource, but at the expense of every other individual, because the stock is going to deplete. But at the expense of every other individual with no way to exclude anyone from consuming. Yeah, that's the gist of it. So I guess the question is, fishing in the river will likely lead to the tragedy of commons because of which of the following reasons. 1, nobody will enjoy fishing because of the lack of private contributions to the maintenance of the river. 2, anyone can fish in the river, and one person's fishing activity decreases the ability of someone else to fish with success. 3, all fishermen will choose to fish in the river because of limited access to the stream. Or 4, all fishermen will choose to fish in the stream, believing that there are more fish there. And I agree with our junior tutor's answer, number 2. Anyone can fish in the river, and one person's fishing activity decreases the ability of someone else to fish with success. So for example, if I'm at the river and there are 10 fish in the river, and I start fishing and I catch a couple fish, let's say I catch 3 fish, then you come along and start to fish. Now there's only 7 fish left, therefore it is going to be harder to fish. Common resource. Your junior tutor nailed it. Move on here to question 4. How does the Coase theorem provide an alternative to government regulation and provision of services? How is the definition of private property critical to the Coase theorem? And the Coase theorem is essentially states that if property rights are assigned, an efficient outcome can be reached. In the absence of transaction costs, I think is what it is off the top of my head. Our junior tutor says it right here. Coase theorem states that if there are no transaction costs involved, a mutually beneficial outcome can be attained, regardless of which party has ultimately been awarded property rights. So suppose there is a turbine company operating a windmill, which is very noisy. The people living in the periphery of the windmill, the people living in the periphery of the windmill get disturbed by this noise. Now, there are no property rights in the noise spectrum, as in who owned how much noise decibels. The households then can take this plea of theirs to court. The court can either favor the turbine company's plea of retaining their business, or they can favor the plea of the people residing by the windmill. If the court decides that the households have the right to live there in peace without noise, then the company has to shut down its operations. They won't be able to run the windmill anymore. Suppose the company decides to compensate the neighboring households, and the value of the windmill of the turbine company is greater than the value of the households to enjoying a peaceful environment, then a mutually beneficial arrangement can be attained. So basically, this windmill company can pay the family the amount that the family values their peace and quiet at. So if the turbine company pays that family enough, they're going to say, yeah, go ahead and run your windmill. That's fine by us. The turbine company can compensate the neighboring household by giving them money and retaining their business. Now, if the case goes to court and the neighbors win, then they will be ceased of this monetary gain, and the turbine company too will have to shut down its operations. And if the case goes to the court and the turbine company wins, then also the residents have nothing to gain. I think what they're saying is if it went to court and the turbine company won, which meant they were allowed to run their windmill, the family could pay the turbine company an amount that they value the peace and quiet at, that the turbine would shut down its windmill if the company were to pay an amount that is probably worth more than running the windmill. So without involving government, a mutually beneficial agreement can be attained if there are no costs to bargaining, i.e. no transaction costs are involved. Now take the case of any public good, say a park. Entry is free. Anybody can enter, play, sleep, walk, run, cycle, etc. As we went over in the previous question, a park is a public good. It's non-rival, meaning that if I walk through the park, it doesn't prevent you from walking through the park, and non-excludable, in that nobody can tell you not to walk through the park. Okay, take the pace of a park. You can run, walk, whatever. Nobody will care about the health of the park or maintenance of the park. Eventually, it will start deteriorating, and no one will want to enter it. Coase theorem doesn't work here, as there are not going to be any mutual beneficial ways of bargaining. It's not possible to divide the park into a private party. No one's incentives are being hurt here, and hence there is no need of bargaining and coming to an agreement. Had it been privately owned, the owner would have charged a usage fee and in turn kept the park neat and clean. Hence, the essence of private property is important in the case of Coase theorem. I think this example here is assuming that the government doesn't own the park and it's not maintained, which is fine. There's a chart for the Coase theorem, I think, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I should probably draw that for you guys if we're talking about it. I can hopefully explain what it is I'm drawing. So on the y-axis, we've got the marginal effect of the externality. So in their example, this is the, I believe this is the externality is going to be the effect, like the noise effect to the family. On the x-axis here, they have fertilizer use, but in our case, that'll be like windmill use. The MD, marginal damage curve. Is going to be how much the company runs the windmill. So the more they run the windmill, the more damage that is done. Marginal benefit is going to be from the company's perspective. Obviously, the longer the company runs the windmill, the more benefit they're going to get as it produces more power. So at this point here, when windmill use is 0, the marginal benefit is at its highest, and as windmill use increases, the marginal benefit falls. So if they go to court and property rights are assigned at I don't remember that off the top of my head. I'm probably going to have to search this up. Okay, so before their property rights, the windmill company is going to use its windmill until it no longer offers a benefit. That's this point here, so that is Q2. And then when property rights are assigned, either way, one is going to pay the other to a point where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal damage. So if the property rights were sent to the homeowners living there, then they're going to pay the windmill company to use their windmill less. Or sorry, no, if the property rights were assigned to the windmill company, the homeowners are going to pay the windmill company to run the windmill less. The property rights were sent to the homeowners, then they would pay to have the windmill use reduction. So when that happens, they're going to move to a point where the marginal benefit equals the marginal damage, Q1. Yeah. It's been a long time since I drew this graph. I apologize for the somewhat rough explanation, but this was an excellent answer by our junior tutor. You can look into it a little further if you just Google Coase theorem. The gist of it is that in the absence of transaction costs, an efficient outcome can be reached if property rights are assigned. Question 5. Question 5, say you were watching your favorite television program and a commercial comes on. A soothing voice begins to describe your imaginary vacation in the lush tropical paradise of Timbuktu, which is a remote island in the South Pacific, fictitious, of course. while pictures of rainforests and secluded beaches flash across your TV screen. The commercial begins to describe your daily itinerary, while showing you the gentle and friendly native people of Timbuktu, performing native dances and other activities to the delight of the tourists. You wonder about these gentle and friendly people of Timbuktu living on an island thousands of miles away from anything out in the middle of the South Pacific. You ask yourself why the people of Timbuktu would desire tourism to come to their peaceful and secluded island. What could they possibly do with that added aggregate income generated by tourism when they're out in the middle of nowhere? What could they possibly spend their money on? What about the pollution and the noise, the hustle and bustle of the crime? And what about their peaceful and gentle way of life? Is it worth sacrificing for more income? Increases in GDP and aggregate income do not always mean the level of well-being and happiness increased is well for all citizens of the society. With this in mind, please explain your thoughts or insights regarding this hypothetical commercial. And our junior tutor said, in my opinion, the ecological footprint arising from higher tourism visits will be detrimental to residents of Timbuktu. Higher revenue from tourism will increase the real GDP of the economy, but being a closed one, the availability of goods and services is currently limited. To spend the higher income, goods have to be imported, leading to a higher import demand. As import rises, net exports components will fall, which lowers GDP. In addition, the externality effects will be negative. Higher tourism will lead to pollution, higher waste products, and ecological imbalance, each of which will contribute to negative externalities. The residents will have to bear the costs of such externality, even though they're not responsible for giving rise to such externality. So, overall, social efficiency will fall. Therefore, even though the real GDP of Timbuktu will increase somewhat, social effects will give rise to inefficiency and deadweight laws. I think that's a very good answer from our junior tutor. Maybe what they're somewhat missing would be the investment in infrastructure that would come with an increased income. So if they're able to invest in infrastructure, which would allow them to import less and generate more income and more goods on their home island, then imports would not rise as much, and they would be able to employ more people, more of their native people, and the general GDP would rise faster. There's, I think, one other point I wanted to add. Increases in GDP and aggregate income do not always mean the level of well-being and happiness increase as well for all citizens of the society. That's very true. I just wanted to add that although GDP is a very good measure, GDP per capita in particular is a good measure of overall well-being, it's an imperfect measure. And it can be the case where well-being and happiness do not correlate with an increase in GDP. Give me a second here, somebody's phoning me. Question 6. In 1964, taxes were cut aggressively. Consider the impact of the tax cut on consumer spending and shift aggregate supply or aggregate demand appropriately. The tax cut did not have much effect on the level of prices. It is more likely that the aggregate supply curve was steep or pretty flat. So we're going to draw. So aggregate demand slopes down. Aggregate supply slopes up. I'm going to draw it upward sloping for now. We'll likely change it to flat at the end. I think I'm going to make sure just to get these axes right. I think it's real GDP on the x-axis. Prices, right? That's supposed to say price level, so I'm going to try it again. So we've got price level, where price is on the y-axis, and real GDP on the x-axis. Aggregate supply slopes upwards, and aggregate demand slopes downwards. There is a cut in taxes. So tax cuts, when used properly, have stimulated the economy. Many have credited George W. Bush's tax cuts for moving the economy out of recession. Effectively, if there is a tax cut, you now have an effectively higher level of disposable income, or income period. And some of that income you may save, but you would think that at least some portion of it will be spent as well. So this is going to constitute a shift to the right of aggregate demand. Call that AD prime. Tax cuts, when used properly, have stimulated the economy. In 1964, there was an 18% cut in personal taxes to spur growth. The legislation was designed to encourage an increase in consumer spending, which was believed to be a great success. The tax cut, or say reduction in taxes, according to the law, will shift the aggregate demand curve rightwards due to more disposable income and cause consumption and savings to increase. The aggregate supply curve will shift outwards because there is more incentive to work after tax cut than before, so production level increases. Also, a tax cut implies more income in the hands of the people, more savings along with more consumption, so there's more investment in the economy. Tax cut did not have much impact on the level of prices. It's more likely that the aggregate supply curve is flat, implying flexibility of output in response to change in tax rates. It can also be said that there's elasticity of aggregate supply. So we'll run through this example first, where our aggregate supply is somewhat steep. So we have our original price level here, P star, and our original GDP here, Y star. And there's been this increase to aggregate demand. And this increase is going to cause real GDP to rise, so output is going to go up, which is good when you're trying to get out of a recession. But as a result, the price level is also going to rise. However, if we are instead in a situation where we've got a nearly flat supply curve, so aggregate supply is instead like this. We would see still see that large increase in real GDP. However, with a flat curve, we're going to see a very small increase in the price level. So if the tax cut does not have much of effect on the level of prices, it must be that the aggregate supply curve was flat. Because we saw when it was steep, prices went up considerably and GDP went up considerably. When it was flat, GDP went up even more than the first scenario, but prices barely rose. On to question 7 here. What drives economic growth? Who benefits from it? Is it ultimately necessary for society or self-defeating? Discuss with reference to any three of the following: Smith, Malthus, Ricardo, or Mill. Our junior tutor said that the Malthusian theory of economic development. Malthus's principles of the political economy show that he was more realistic in his analysis of population growth in the context of economic development as compared to his essay on population. He said that for economic development, population growth alone is not sufficient. Rather, it is a result of the development process. As Malthus wrote, an increase in population cannot take place without a proportionate increase in wealth. The demand for labor directly depends on the rate of capital accumulation. As one increases, the other will also increase. This encourages population growth. But wealth will not increase due to the insignificant changes in population. In fact, population growth increases wealth only if it increases effective demand. The role of production and distribution. Malthus regarded production and distribution as the two grand elements of wealth. If both of them are combined in the right proportions, the wealth of a country can increase in a short time. On the other hand, if they are dealt with separately or combined in improper proportions, the time taken to increase wealth will be thousands. I think will be much longer, is what they were trying to say. So for increasing the wealth of a country within a little duration, Malthus emphasizes maximum production and optimum allocation of resources. Factors in economic development. Some water. Malthus reformed the problem of economic development by explaining the difference between the potential gross national product and real gross national product. But the principal problem is one of achieving a high level of the potential gross national product. According to Malthus, the size of the potential gross national product depends on land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. These four factors, when employed in the right way, increase production in the agricultural and industrial sectors. An increase in both agricultural and industrial production depends on the accumulation of capital, the fertility of the soil, and technological progress that leads. Besides this, Malthus gave importance to non-economic factors in economic development that includes the safety of property, good constitution, and excellent laws, properly administered and hardworking and regular habits, general rectitude of character. Don't think I'm gonna have much to add to this one. I think our junior tutor is covering pretty well everything I could say. Adam Smith said that for a developing economy, both income level and capital stock rise. The rate of capital increase also shows a tendency to rise. This increases capital over a time period. So I guess if we go back to that previous question there was that like kind of island economy for a developing country. If they bring in tourism to increase their income level, and they then invest that money from the tourism into infrastructure, they will then be increasing both their capital stock as well as the income level because they can now employ people of the island. At this stage, the economy has reached its stationary state, which is totally different from the state of underdevelopment. In a stationary state, the common characteristics of the economy become unchanged population, constant income, subsistence wages, complete elimination of profits, and absence of net investment. He stressed the point that the rate of economic progress would only rise if the rate of investment rose. However, the savings and investment rates were primarily dependent on the excess of the market rate of profit over the minimum compensation for bearing risk. Bearing risk, please bear with me, I'm almost done reading. According to the Ricardian economy, there is no emphasis on the stationary state. Progress in the economy is often interrupted for short intervals when it enters into a state of equilibrium, during which the wages stabilize without any growth in population. During these periods, the net income of the economy do not fall to zero, and the rate of return on the investment is more than what is necessary to compensate for the risk. Excess wages above the subsistence level promotes population growth. In this temporary phase, the rise in wages decline the proportion of profits and income, which leads to a slower rate of capital accumulation. Eventually, when the supply of labor almost matches up with the demand for it, the economy reaches a new equilibrium position. Comparison of older and newer economies' equilibrium positions depends on at least two major aspects. First is the size of the population grows with every new equilibrium position the economy reaches. And second is the capital stock of the economy, which also grows larger with every successive equilibrium position reached. Ricardo believes that an economy that has reached a stationary state is characterized by wages at the subsistence level profits, which are merely enough to compensate the risk, constant capital stock, maximum possible population, and a fixed quantity product. In Ricardo's time, underdevelopment did exist. My much shorter take on what drives economic growth would be infrastructure and education are two major ones. There are certainly more, but especially for a developing country, infrastructure and education are two very, very important ones. Question 8, this is our second last question here. Gonna have to rifle through the last two quickly. Analyze the data. Okay. So we've got unemployment rate inflation. So that's how much the unemployment rate grew this year. So it looks like it grew by 8% in the States and 5% in Australia. So the unemployment rate is going to be growing faster in the United States. The labor force in thousands is those who are either working or looking for a job. United States is 154,000, while Australia is 12,000. So obviously, the United States has a larger population, is going to have a larger labor force. The labor force participation rate is 63.7% in the United States and 66% in Australia. So those are people that are either working or actively looking for work. Those that don't fall into that are like children, the elderly, retirees, and people that are not looking for a job. The inflation rate is around 2% in both countries, which is pretty common for developed countries around the world. Yeah, our Janine The Tutor said that the table above lists the unemployment rate increase, labor force participation rate, and the inflation rate in the US and Australia in 2012. Number of people who are willing and able to work but cannot find a job in a country belong to the unemployment. The unemployment rate inflation above shows the rate of increase in the unemployment rate, both in the US and Australia. So there's an 8.1% increase in the US and a 5.2% increase in Australia. Therefore, US experienced a higher increase in unemployment than Australia. The labor force measures the number of people who are willing and able to work, whether they are working or unemployed. However, it does not include those working in the military. That's an important point. I forgot to mention that. The labor force does not include those in the military. Labor force in the US has 154 million people. Australia, it's about 12 million people. Therefore, the US has more labor resources than Australia. However, Australia has a higher labor participation rate of 66%, while the US is 63%. The inflation rate measures how fast the market basket price is to increase. Market basket price includes all the prices of basic commodities, primary goods, and services, such as staple food products, transportation, healthcare, and others. The inflation rate in the US is higher than Australia. The US has 2.1%, while Australia has 1.8%. In Canada, we use the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, to measure inflation. And if you ever wanted to look up what they actually use in the Consumer Price Index, it's a pretty interesting exercise. I'd recommend it. You have the following information about good X and Y. Income elasticity of demand for good X is -3, I think that's supposed to mean. And the cross price elasticity of demand for good X during the price of good Y is 2. So A, what type of good is X? Yeah, our Janine The Tutor has said what I'm thinking, that good X is an inferior good because the income elasticity is negative. So an inferior good is a good that as your income increases, you consume less of it, which seems kind of counterintuitive at first, but like think of like me, I ate a ton of Mr. Noodles in college. As soon as I started working and got an income, I don't think I've had Mr. Noodles 1 cent. So that's something when income is low and you're living on OSAP, federal loans, you get Mr. Noodles because you can get a lot of meals out of it. but once you start earning a decent income, it's the last thing you ever want to eat again. So good X and inferior good, since it has negative income elasticity. On the contrary, if it's positive, then it would be a normal good. Normal good is when your income increases, so does your demand. So I don't know, that's like most goods. Maybe you wouldn't buy, you probably wouldn't buy, I don't know, a video game if you didn't have much money. But if you have some extra disposable income, then you may start purchasing luxuries of that nature. B, would an increase in income and a decrease in the price of good Y unambiguously decrease the demand for good X? Well, why not? Our junior tutor has said that it will decrease the demand for good X if the price of X is less than the price of Y, even after a decrease in the price of Y since income is increased. And lastly, why or why not? It will increase the demand for good X if the price of X is more than the price of Y in Leah to decrease in the price of Y since income has been increased. Don't really think I have anything else to add there, and I also need to wrap it up so our next tutor can take the stage. Correct. The one I was maybe going to mention a Giffen good here. It may be worth defining just for future reference. From what I remember, they're a very rare occurrence. So they're low income and non-luxury. And it's more of a phenomenon than anything. So what happens with Giffen goods are when the price goes up, demand goes up. And when the price goes down, they're cheaper, demand goes down. Of course, this makes no intuitive sense. And it's more of like a phenomenon than anything. I'm trying to remember of what examples are. I think it was like some about potatoes in some European country they observed this or something. They're saying like rice and bread and stuff. I don't remember any specific examples about that, and I'm really out of time, so I'm just gonna leave it at this. An interesting read though, if you're interested in why that happens, because I certainly don't know why it is. Didn't have anything else to add to that. So thank you for watching. This has been Kevin from OneClass. If you wanted to ask a question, there should be a link below this video. If you ask it, hopefully myself or our other senior tutor, Ose, will be able to get to it and answer it on stream this week. Like and share with your friends if you liked the video. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. You guys have a nice night.